The desert was relentless that day. The sun hung low, golden and merciless, casting long shadows over the outpost. Dust swirled across the sand, driven by a stubborn wind that carried a bitter, metallic tang of gunfire. Somewhere far beyond the ridges, an enemy sniper had claimed control over the battlefield, like a phantom in the heat shimmer. Every U.S. soldier in the forward operating base knew the danger. Every patrol, every mission, every attempt to reclaim the territory had ended with failure. 8 skilled marksmen had already tried. 8 had missed. The soldiers crouched behind sandbags and concrete barriers, eyes scanning the horizon, hands twitching over triggers, hearts pounding like war drums. Even the most experienced among them were tense. Every crack of gunfire from the enemy nest sent a jolt through their spines. They had been pinned for hours, trapped in a deadly stalemate, unable to advance or retreat. The insurgent sniper seemed to anticipate every move, every peek above the barricade, every calculated breath aimed at survival. The commander, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Harding, paced behind the barricade, his boots crunching over the coarse sand. His uniform was soaked in sweat despite the dry heat, and his face bore the marks of sleepless nights and countless firefights. The frustration etched into his brow was evident. He clenched his jaw, scanning the men in his unit, noting their anxious expressions, the fatigue, the flickers of fear in their eyes. 8 attempts had already failed. 8 lives had been wasted in hope and misfire, and the sniper continued to dominate the battlefield with near-perfect precision. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, slapping the side of a sandbag. The men flinched at the sharp sound. "Every single one of you missed. 8 shots. 8. His voice rose as he gestured to the horizon. "Do you know what that tells me? It tells me we're either blind, sloppy, or just not trying hard enough." His words carried, sharp as a whip, across the tense silence of the outpost. The soldiers flinched, murmuring quietly among themselves. They knew he was angry, not out of cruelty, but out of the raw desperation of a mission hanging by a thread. A crackling report came from the ridgeline. The sniper had taken another shot, narrowly missing Corporal Jameson, who had barely ducked behind a stack of sandbags. Dust kicked up around the empty shell casings of the U.S. rifles as the wind carried the scent of gunpowder across the dry air. The soldiers exchanged anxious glances. The sniper wasn't just skilled. He was precise, calculating, and patient. The desert stretched infinitely, offering no cover, no safety. They were trapped in a game they hadn't chosen to play, and the stakes were life itself. Lieutenant Colonel Harding stopped pacing, planting his hands on his knees. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm despite the storm of frustration and adrenaline coursing through him. He had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. The sniper's position was rumored to be nearly impossible to reach. He had already guessed the likely ridges, the stone outcroppings, even attempted to lure the sniper into exposing himself, and yet every attempt had failed. Each misfire weighed on Harding's shoulders like an anchor. Lives depended on precision, and precision had so far evaded them all. The men were tense, restless. Private Collins wiped sweat from his brow, teeth clenched, eyes flicking nervously over the barren ridges. "Sir," he muttered, voice barely audible over the desert wind, "we're wasting time." "We can't." "Shut it," Harding snapped, his tone cutting through the tension. His eyes scanned the young soldiers, some barely out of basic training, others seasoned but unnerved by the sniper's relentless accuracy. "We will take that sniper out," he growled, "one way or another. And if it's the last thing I do, I will not leave this ridge until he's neutralized. Understand?" A chorus of murmured affirmatives followed, but Harding could see the doubt lingering in the corners of their eyes. 8 misses. 8 failures. Every soldier carried it in their hearts, like a mark of shame. The commander understood their hesitation. He had been there himself, aiming through scopes at impossible distances, knowing the target was watching, knowing a single miscalculation could be fatal. The desert sun dipped lower, painting the sand in streaks of red and orange. Shadows stretched long, providing brief cover in patches, but never enough. The sniper could have been anywhere hidden in stone, behind ridges, blending with the terrain. And yet, despite the danger, the men held their positions. Retreat was not an option. It had never been one. The soldiers had been trained for this, drilled in long-range engagement and battlefield patience, but theory and reality rarely matched. From a distance, the enemy sniper was a ghost, almost untouchable. 8 bullets, 8 missed opportunities each one, a reminder that skill alone was sometimes not enough. Harding crouched, his gaze narrowing at the horizon. He studied the terrain, calculating angles, distances, wind speeds. The shot would have to be perfect. Any deviation, any hesitation, and the sniper would strike again. "Listen up," he barked, raising his voice above the whistling wind. "We can't waste another minute. 8 attempts have failed, yes, but that does not mean we give up. I want eyes on that ridge. Every man eyes on that ridge. Watch, wait, and listen." The men adjusted their positions, rifles trained, scopes scanning, muscles taut. The desert seemed to hold its breath along with them. Each second dragged on like hours. Somewhere in the distance, the faint glint of sun on metal hinted at the sniper's location, or perhaps it was another mirage, a trick of the heat. Soldiers whispered silently, barely daring to breathe, afraid that the slightest movement could betray them. Harding took a deep breath and ran his hand through his hair. His mind raced. What they needed now was not brute force, but precision and calm under pressure, the kind of calm he knew very few possessed. His eyes scanned his unit, lingering on the youngest recruits and the most nervous veterans. No one looked confident. No one looked ready. And yet, someone had to step up. Someone had to end this nightmare before it claimed more lives. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying the faint sound of movement small, almost imperceptible. A sandbag scraped in the distance, footsteps. Harding's heart pounded. He motioned for silence. Every soldier froze. Their rifles hummed softly as they adjusted their grip. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere beyond the ridges, the sniper waited, unaware that the tide might be turning. Harding's gaze fell to the back of the formation. Among the nervous, the sweating, the jittery soldiers, a hand slowly rose. It was small, almost hesitant, yet steady. Silence fell heavier, broken only by the faint rustle of wind through sand. Harding froze. He knew every soldier in his unit. None of them were confident enough to make this shot except. Could it be? The desert sun dipped lower, a thin streak of crimson at the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers over the sand. The base seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for a response. Harding's heart pounded. The tension was unbearable. 8 failures, lives at risk, and yet, possibly, a chance and unexpected one, quiet, almost invisible, was emerging from the back of the formation. The moment hung on a knife's edge, delicate and dangerous, and the desert waited, as if it knew history was about to be written. The hand rose slowly, almost shyly, from the back of the formation. Lieutenant Colonel Harding's gaze locked onto it, disbelief warring with hope. The soldiers around her shifted, some glancing nervously, others rolling their eyes at the audacity of the gesture. The girl had barely spoken in months of training, blending into the background as if she were part of the desert itself. And now, in the most desperate moment of their lives, she was volunteering. The wind carried the faint scent of sand and sweat, And for the first time in hours, the commander felt a spark of cautious optimism. The other soldiers whispered among themselves, tension thick in every wordless exchange. She's the quiet one," muttered Private Collins, jaw tight, eyes never leaving her. "You're kidding," grumbled Sergeant Miller, a seasoned marksman, arms crossed. "She hasn't even fired in combat. How's she gonna handle this?" Harding, however, didn't flinch. He studied her carefully, calm, focused, almost eerily still. There was no hesitation in her posture, no flicker of fear in her eyes, only an unspoken confidence. She had been underestimated, ignored, overlooked, but in that instant, she alone seemed to carry the answer to their impossible problem. The wind whipped around them, rattling sandbags and sending grit into eyes and mouths. Every soldier instinctively adjusted their grip on their weapons. The enemy sniper was still out there, invisible and deadly, perched somewhere far beyond their line of sight. The reports of past failures echoed in Harding's mind, 8 bullets gone, 8 chances wasted. Lives had been at stake, and the weight of responsibility pressed like a leaden blanket. He swallowed hard and raised his hand. "Step forward," he commanded. His voice was firm but measured. There was no turning back. She moved forward silently, boots crunching softly over the sand, rifle slung over her shoulder. Every step was deliberate, precise, confident. Soldiers instinctively gave her space, almost reverentially. Her uniform, caked with dust from previous drills, didn't betray any special skill. To the untrained eye, she could have been anyone. But the commander recognized the subtle signs of focus, the tight grip on her rifle, the calm steadiness in her shoulders, the unflinching gaze fixed on the horizon. She was a storm of competence wrapped in silence. As she approached the sandbagged firing line, the other soldiers couldn't help themselves. Eyes flicked toward her, skepticism battling curiosity. She didn't speak a word, didn't look around for approval or encouragement. She merely crouched low, rifle in hand, as if she had been born to this moment. The commander, hardened by decades of combat, felt a strange sensation, a mixture of awe, tension, and disbelief. He had led countless missions, faced countless dangers, yet he had never encountered someone so unshakable in silence. The enemy sniper had been a phantom for hours, every movement calculated, every shot terrifyingly accurate. The U.S. unit had tried every trick in the book flanking maneuvers, decoys, indirect fire, even psychological tactics to force the sniper out of hiding. Nothing had worked. And now, hope had come in the form of this quiet girl who had somehow mastered her fear. Harding gestured toward the ridge. "Get into position," he said. Her eyes flicked briefly toward him. Then she nodded once, decisively. No questions, no complaints, no hesitation. She moved to a slight depression in the sand, setting her rifle down with precision. The scope glinted faintly in the dying sun, a small reflection of light that seemed insignificant, almost trivial, yet carried the weight of the moment. She lay prone, adjusting her body, aligning her shoulder, testing the recoil. Every motion was meticulous, a dance of patience and skill. The soldiers around her fell silent. Even Sergeant Miller, who had scoffed at her initial step forward, found himself holding his breath. The desert seemed to recognize the shift in energy, a quiet, almost sacred pause that felt heavier than hours of gunfire. Harding crouched beside her, voice lowered. "Distance is approximately 2.5 miles, he said, though she didn't flinch. Wind is tricky at that elevation. Heat distortion is intense. You know the risks. One shot, one chance." She adjusted a knob on her scope, lips barely moving as she whispered numbers and calculations to herself. Her eyes never left the distant ridge. To the men watching, it was as if she were speaking a language they couldn't understand, a precise, intimate dialogue between her, the rifle, and the desert itself. The enemy sniper shifted in the ridge, oblivious to the silent observer preparing to challenge him. For hours, he had been untouchable, confident in his distance and concealment. But the desert has a way of hiding more than just men. It hides talent, patience, and focus. She exhaled, slow and controlled, as the men around her stilled. The wind gusted sharply, kicking sand into the faces of the soldiers, yet she didn't blink. Every detail, every variable, every distraction was accounted for. To the others, it seemed impossible. To her, it was merely routine. Hours of preparation, training, and instinct had led to this single moment. The soldiers around her felt a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety, their hearts sinking with the rhythm of her slow, steady breaths. The sniper was a threat, lethal and precise, but he had underestimated the invisible potential in the back of the formation. Collins whispered under his breath, barely audible, "She's going to do it. She has to." Miller shook his head, silently praying that hope wasn't just a mirage. The air was thick, charged with tension, every second stretching into eternity. Finally, she adjusted her position one last time, testing the stability of her rifle against the uneven sand. She took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the pulse of the desert, the rhythm of the wind, and the distant pulse of the enemy. Her finger hovered lightly on the trigger, ready. The soldiers around her felt as though the world had contracted to the space between her and the ridge, every heartbeat, every tiny movement magnified. Harding felt a surge of adrenaline, knowing that one correct calculation could save his men, while one misstep could cost them everything. Then silence. The kind of silence that makes the desert feel infinite. Even the wind seemed to pause. Every soldier froze, eyes locked on the glinting scope at the end of her rifle. Collins whispered again, barely audible, "Come on, come on." The tension was unbearable, but in that pressure, a strange calm radiated from her. It was the calm of someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for a single moment, a single breath, a single shot that could rewrite everything. The commander studied her one last time. His mind raced, cataloging every possible scenario, every mistake, every unknown variable. 8 shots had failed. 8 lives had been risked. Yet now, against the backdrop of an unforgiving desert, a single soldier, quiet, underestimated, almost invisible, was about to face the impossible. He clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This moment would define them all. And as he watched, he realized that perhaps, just perhaps, hope had come in the most unexpected form. A distant ripple of movement caught her eye. The enemy sniper had shifted slightly, adjusting his own position. The desert stretched between them, vast and unyielding. And yet, for the first time in hours, Harding allowed himself a small, cautious belief. The quiet girl at the back of the unit, unseen and underestimated, might just be their salvation. Every soldier around her remained tense, knowing the next moments could change everything. The ridge, the sniper, the outpost, all seemed suspended in anticipation. The sun dipped closer to the horizon, turning the sky a molten gold, and the shadows stretched long across the sand. The soldiers could almost feel the weight of history pressing down. It was more than a mission now. It was a test of patience, skill, courage, and belief. And the girl, silent and resolute, was about to answer that test. No one knew what would happen next. The desert waited. The sniper waited. And she waited, calm, focused, ready to defy the odds. The soldiers watched in tense silence as she adjusted her rifle, every movement precise, deliberate, practiced. Yet for all the awe and anxiety around her, no one truly knew the story behind the quiet soldier who now carried the weight of the mission on her shoulders. Lieutenant Colonel Harding, crouched nearby, had seen countless faces in battle, some brash, some silent, some brimming with confidence, some trembling under pressure, but she was unlike anyone he had encountered. There was a strange aura to her calm, a sense that every motion, every breath, was purposeful. But what forged such focus and fearlessness? Her story began far from the desert sands and the chaos of modern warfare. She was born in a small town in the rural Midwest, where the horizon stretched endlessly, dotted with farms and scattered woods. Life there was quiet, often harsh, and demanded independence. Her father, a hunter and survivalist, had taught her early the skills that would eventually define her: patience, observation, and the subtle art of understanding the land. A hunter waits for the perfect moment, he would say, his voice low, carrying authority and warmth. Rushing is for the foolish. Precision is everything. From the age of 12, she spent weekends trailing deer and birds across the fields, learning to move silently, to read tracks in the dirt, to anticipate the rhythms of the animals. Every stalk, every aim, every shot required calculation, discipline, and nerves of steel. She grew comfortable with silence, finding power in the ability to wait, watch, and act with absolute accuracy. Her father, strict but loving, encouraged her to develop her mind as much as her skill, teaching her to think ahead, to anticipate consequences, and to respect the unseen forces of nature. It was in these quiet woods that she first learned control over both body and mind, skills that would one day translate to a battlefield far removed from home. In high school, she became known as the quiet girl, the one who rarely spoke, who carried herself with measured confidence, who seemed absorbed in her own world of observation. She excelled academically, often seeing patterns and connections her classmates overlooked. But it was the rifle range that set her apart. Where others rushed, she waited. Where others panicked under pressure, she remained calm. By her senior year, she had earned accolades for marksmanship that would have astonished even seasoned hunters. She wasn't loud about it. She didn't need to be. Her skills spoke for her. After high school, she enlisted in the U.S. military, drawn by a sense of duty and the promise of testing herself beyond familiar landscapes. At first, she went unnoticed. In a unit filled with loud personalities and bravado, her silence was a cloak. She followed orders, completed tasks meticulously, and rarely sought attention. Her superiors noted her competence, but even they underestimated her potential. It wasn't until sniper training that the full extent of her skill became evident. She shattered records in distance accuracy, precision, and endurance. Every calculation, every shot, every adjustment she made demonstrated a mind honed for extreme conditions. Yet she remained quiet, almost invisible to those around her. Even in training, she was a mystery. Other trainees whispered about her, some in admiration, some in doubt. "She's lucky," one would say, seeing her hit targets at impossible ranges. "She's just hiding," another muttered, thinking her calm was mere luck. Yet luck had little to do with it. She had spent years mastering patience, focus, and observation. Her life had been an accumulation of quiet preparation, each step intentionally designed to build her capacity for moments like the one unfolding now. During early deployment, she maintained the same quiet vigilance. The battlefield was a different kind of wilderness, but the principles remained: patience, observation, calculation, precision. While her comrades relied on experience, instinct, and sometimes luck, she relied on preparation, analysis, and controlled action. Her reputation began to grow among those who noticed, though most still underestimated her. She moved silently through dangerous zones, always calculating, always observing, always ready to act when the moment demanded. And now, on this desert ridge, that lifetime of preparation had led her to the ultimate test. Lieutenant Colonel Harding reflected on this as he watched her. He had led soldiers through countless missions, seen heroes emerge in unexpected places, but few had the quiet intensity she carried. Most soldiers depended on reaction and instinct. She depended on calculation and patience. Every instinct, every memory of long hours spent tracking game, every lesson learned under the watchful eyes of her father or in sniper school was converging in this one critical moment. The ridge, the enemy sniper, the lives of the soldiers below, it was all now within her grasp. The men around her didn't know this history. They only saw the silent girl, perhaps unsure if she could succeed. Some doubted. Some hoped. But they all felt the electricity in the air, the anticipation that a turning point had arrived. Collins whispered again, eyes wide, barely breathing. This is it. Sergeant Miller, arms crossed, felt a knot of tension in his stomach, grudgingly admiring her composure. She was calm, focused, and perfectly still, a living contradiction to the chaos around her. Her childhood had taught her that control over oneself was more powerful than force over others. Her teenage years had trained her to act only when the conditions were perfect. Military training had refined those instincts, sharpening her mind, strengthening her patience, and teaching her to read both the terrain and her target. And now, all of that training was culminating in a single moment, a chance to change the course of the day, to end the threat that had pinned down the base and threatened the lives of her fellow soldiers. She adjusted the scope one last time, whispering subtle calculations under her breath, invisible to those around her. Distance, wind speed, mirage, gravity, even humidity, every factor accounted for. Her finger hovered over the trigger, but she did not rush. Rushing, she knew, was the enemy of precision. Around her, soldiers remained tense, watching, barely daring to breathe. In her mind, there was no audience. There was only the target, the rifle, and the desert stretching endlessly between them. The sun continued its descent, burning gold across the horizon, shadows elongating across the sand. The sniper remained hidden, unaware that his carefully calculated advantage was about to be challenged. The girl's focus was absolute. Every lesson learned in forests, fields, classrooms, and training grounds was now a weapon. Every quiet hour of preparation, every whispered number, every controlled breath had led to this ridge, this scope, this impossible shot. And in that moment, she was ready. Lieutenant Colonel Harding watched her silently, knowing that the history she carried with her childhood, her training, her experience, was about to collide with the present in a way that would define them all. This was more than skill. It was instinct, discipline, and courage shaped over years of quiet preparation. He held his breath, waiting for the moment that could change everything, aware that the lives of his soldiers, the success of the mission, and perhaps the legend of this soldier depended on what happened next. She breathed deeply, her finger hovering over the trigger. Around her, the soldiers held their collective breath. The desert, the sun, the shifting wind, and the hidden sniper all seemed to fade into the background. There was only the girl, trained by years of patience, observation, and quiet determination. And for the first time that day, hope returned to the ridge, not loud, not flashy, but quiet, unassuming, and undeniably powerful. In that suspended moment, every soldier realized something remarkable. The quietest person in the room often carried the loudest power. And the quiet girl, invisible to most, was about to prove it. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Harding crouched behind the sandbags, the midday sun scorching the ridge and dust sticking to his sweat-slicked uniform. He had seen courage before, in young soldiers facing impossible odds, in seasoned veterans performing miracles in the chaos of battle. But this was different. This was not about courage in the moment. It was about precision, calculation, and composure under the most extreme pressure imaginable. And now, that burden rested on the quiet girl at the back of the formation, the one everyone had overlooked until this desperate moment. His heart pounded, a relentless drumbeat against his ribs. 8 marksmen had already failed. 8 shots had missed their target. Lives had been risked, lives had been saved, and yet the sniper still dominated the battlefield like a phantom. Harding knew that one more failure could cost even more. He had led missions where failure was an option, where improvisation could save the day. But this, the desert, the sniper, the impossibly long distance left, no room for error. The girl moved with calm determination, adjusting her scope, measuring the wind, checking the angle of the ridges, all without a word. Her stillness was unnerving. She carried herself as though she had been preparing for this moment her entire life, and in truth, she had. Every hunt in the woods with her father, every late night practicing marksmanship, every meticulous calculation in sniper school had led her to this ridge. But could she perform under the weight of responsibility, under the eyes of a dozen soldiers, with the lives of friends and comrades hanging on a single trigger pull? Harding studied her carefully. Her hands were steady, her posture perfect, her breathing controlled. He could see the faint sheen of sweat on her brow, but her eyes were focused, unwavering. Yet doubt gnawed at him. It was not fear, it was instinct. He had faced deadly snipers before. He had seen their precision, their patience, their ability to vanish into the desert like ghosts. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and she could become just another statistic. The desert was unforgiving, and it did not forgive inexperience. The other soldiers whispered quietly, casting uncertain glances at the girl. Some tried to mask their fear with bravado, but it lingered beneath every movement. "I don't know if she's ready," muttered Sergeant Miller under his breath, arms crossed, jaw tight. "She's fine in training, but this isn't training." Collins, younger and less experienced, shook his head, eyes wide. "We're pinned down. We've already tried 8 times. What if?" He stopped, realizing even he feared speaking the possibility aloud. Harding raised his hand, cutting through the murmurs. "Enough," he barked. His voice carried authority, tempered with the weight of responsibility. He stared at the girl, who was now fully prone, rifle ready, scope aligned with the distant ridge. "You understand what's at stake," he said quietly. His tone softened, almost fatherly, though edged with urgency. "You get 1 shot. 1. The sniper has been hiding all day. Any hesitation, any mistake, and people die. Are you ready?" She didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. Her eyes met his briefly, unwavering, steady, communicating more than speech ever could. A silent nod, precise and confident, was all he needed. And yet, even as he recognized her readiness, doubt still lingered. Could someone so quiet, so underestimated, succeed where 8 trained marksmen had failed? His mind raced, running through every possible scenario: wind gusts, heat mirages, fatigue, distraction. He could calculate, plan, and anticipate, but this was a human being facing another human being at impossible distance. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The soldiers around them adjusted their positions, rifles trained, eyes scanning, hearts hammering. Every minute, every second stretched into eternity. Harding's gaze never left the girl. He had a profound understanding of skill, talent, and courage, but even he felt the weight of the unknown pressing down. She had talent, yes, but would that talent hold under this unique, deadly pressure? He reflected on her background, the quiet hours of practice, the patience she had cultivated since childhood. Perhaps that was the key. 8 failures had been made by those relying on confidence, experience, and brute force. Perhaps it was not brute force, but patience, precision, and focus that would turn the tide. He considered calling off the attempt, choosing a more conservative approach, but time was slipping away. Every second the sniper remained alive, the danger increased. The girl adjusted her scope again, whispering subtle calculations under her breath. To the men watching, it looked like indecision, but Harding knew better. This was meticulous preparation, honed over years. She was not rushing. She never did. Every detail, every factor distance, wind, heat, mirage was being accounted for. Her focus was absolute. And yet, Harding could not suppress the nagging doubt. The sniper could see movement, detect even the faintest sign of nervousness. She had to be flawless. Collins swallowed hard, watching her. "She's incredible," he whispered, awe in his voice. Sergeant Miller remained skeptical but silent, his eyes narrowing as he watched the girl prepare. She didn't glance around for reassurance, didn't ask for guidance. She was alone in a way that terrified and fascinated the men around her. The desert stretched infinitely beyond them, barren and unforgiving, yet she seemed at peace within it, her mind fully aligned with the task ahead. Harding exhaled slowly, trying to steady his nerves. He had led many missions, faced countless dangers, and seen courage in its many forms. But there was something about this moment, about the quiet girl on the ridge, that set it apart. This was not only about skill. It was about composure, courage, and an uncanny mastery of oneself. It was about trusting preparation and intuition when nothing else could guide you. He realized that while doubt was natural, it could not cloud judgment. She had trained for this, and he had to believe she could succeed. The wind shifted, carrying grit and dust across the ridge, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Even the sniper, hidden miles away, seemed unaware of the impending challenge. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the sand in long, dark fingers. The outpost felt suspended in time, caught between fear and hope. Harding's gaze sharpened. One decision, one moment, could define the outcome for everyone present. And in that moment, he chose to trust her. He lowered himself beside her slightly, maintaining a careful distance, voice quiet. "Remember your training," he said, almost a whisper, though heavy with authority. "Control your breathing. Focus on the variables. Trust your instincts. You've prepared for this your whole life. One shot." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, unwavering, then returned to the scope. A single nod. That was all. She was ready. Around them, the soldiers held their collective breath. Every movement seemed magnified, every sound exaggerated the whistling of wind, the faint scrape of sandbags, the distant echo of gunfire from earlier engagements. Time slowed, as though the desert itself had recognized the gravity of the moment. The commander's mind raced through contingencies, but even he knew the outcome rested entirely on her. He could plan, strategize, calculate, but now he could only watch and hope. 8 marksmen had failed. 8 shots had missed. Lives had been at stake. And now, in the quiet of the desert, with the sun sinking toward the horizon, the silent girl carried the responsibility of all those attempts, all those failures, all those lives. Harding could only hope that her preparation, her patience, and her composure would prevail. And deep down, a spark of belief ignited within him. Perhaps, against all odds, she could succeed where others had fallen short. The desert air shimmered with heat, a wavering golden mirage that blurred the horizon. The sun had dipped lower, painting the sand in streaks of orange and crimson, stretching shadows across the ridge like elongated fingers. The outpost seemed suspended in time, caught in a moment of unbearable tension. The enemy sniper, somewhere far across the ridge, remained hidden, a ghost in the desert haze. Every movement, every miscalculation, could be fatal. The quiet girl lay prone, rifle in position, scope adjusted, ready. Her presence alone seemed to command the desert, bending the tension around her into something almost sacred. She settled into the small depression she had chosen, a slight dip in the sand that gave her minimal concealment but perfect line of sight. Every movement was deliberate, each adjustment precise, like a dancer perfectly rehearsed. Her legs spread slightly for stability, elbows planted firmly on the ground. The rifle rested against her shoulder, scope aligned with the distant ridge. Her breathing slowed, controlled, measured. Around her, soldiers remained frozen in tense anticipation. Even Sergeant Miller, ever skeptical, found himself holding his breath, eyes narrowing, unwilling to look away. The desert was unforgiving, and she knew it. Every factor mattered: wind, temperature, humidity, mirage, even the Earth's curvature at extreme distances. She whispered calculations under her breath, each number precise, each adjustment deliberate. The men around her couldn't understand the language she spoke, the subtle interplay of angles, velocities, and variables, but they felt its intensity. Collins, crouched nearby, watched wide-eyed, whispering, She's actually going to do it." Miller shook his head, gripping his rifle like a lifeline, unwilling to voice his doubt. Even the commander felt a tension unlike any before. Hope and fear twisted together, suspended on the edge of a single trigger pull. Hours of preparation, both visible and invisible, had led to this point. The girl's childhood hunts in the forests of the Midwest had trained her for patience and observation. Hours of waiting in cold, damp woods for a deer to appear had taught her the rhythm of the world, the subtle signs, the patterns, the timing. Her military training had refined those instincts, adding precision, calculation, and the ability to perform under pressure. And now, those experiences converged in the heat of the desert, between her and a sniper perched miles away. She adjusted the bipod of her .50 caliber rifle, ensuring absolute stability. Every piece of equipment mattered: the rifle itself, the ammunition, the scope. Her fingers, steady as stone, checked the alignment one last time. A misalignment of even a fraction of an inch could mean failure. Around her, soldiers held their collective breath, aware of the impossibility of what was about to happen. 8 marksmen had already failed. Yet here she was, quiet, composed, ready to defy the odds. The wind shifted again, carrying grains of sand and the faint echo of distant gunfire. She adjusted the scope slightly, calculating wind drift. She estimated the mirage over the long distance, factoring in heat waves rising from the sand. Every variable had a solution, every unknown a calculation. This was not luck. This was preparation, patience, and focus honed over years. Lieutenant Colonel Harding watched closely, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. The girl's calm presence seemed to absorb the tension, drawing it into her controlled movements. Collins whispered again, eyes wide. "She's perfect." Miller gritted his teeth, but couldn't tear his eyes away. The men around her were immobilized, not by fear alone, but by awe. The sniper had dominated the battlefield for hours, a ghost, untouchable. But the quiet girl lying in the sand had a presence that made time itself seem to slow. The desert seemed to recognize the gravity of the moment, the stillness stretching, suspended between preparation and action. She shifted slightly, pressing her cheek firmly against the stock of the rifle. Her breathing matched the slow rhythm she had learned long ago, controlled, precise, perfectly timed. Every heartbeat was measured, every second accounted for. She exhaled, then inhaled, feeling the pulse of the desert, the rhythm of the distant ridge, and the faintest hint of movement from the enemy sniper. To the onlookers, it seemed impossible that anyone could operate with such calm under unimaginable pressure. But she had been preparing for this her entire life. Lieutenant Colonel Harding's mind raced. He had led countless soldiers into impossible situations, Yet he felt a surge of helpless anticipation, unlike anything he had experienced before. The girl's focus was absolute. She was no longer just a soldier. She was the embodiment of patience, skill, and resolve. He realized, as he watched, that the difference between failure and success today rested entirely on her. 8 had failed. 1 had yet to prove that precision, patience, and preparation could triumph over distance, deception, and fear. She checked her breathing once more, letting the rhythm steady her body. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the heat waves dancing over the desert floor, the subtle shimmer over the rocks where the enemy sniper might be concealed. Every detail mattered, and she absorbed them all with calm intensity. The men around her could not see her calculations, could not hear the whispered numbers, but they could feel the certainty radiating from her body. Hope and fear collided silently in the desert air. Hours of mental preparation, months of military training, years of disciplined focus, and decades of quiet patience had led to this moment. She adjusted the scope one final time, silently reviewing the variables in her mind. Distance, wind, mirage, gravity, humidity, every factor accounted for. She was ready, and the soldiers around her, witnessing this silent, calculated ritual, understood this was no ordinary marksmanship. This was mastery. The sun dipped closer to the horizon, painting the desert in deep shades of gold and crimson. Shadows stretched long and distorted over the sand, mimicking the tension that hung over the ridge. The enemy sniper, oblivious to the imminent threat, continued his unseen vigil, confident in his dominance. And yet, across the ridge, the quiet girl remained poised, ready. Every heartbeat, every breath, every calculation brought her closer to the moment of truth. She was calm, patient, prepared, and about to challenge the impossible. Collins whispered softly, barely audible over the wind. This is insane. She's actually going to do it." Sergeant Miller, jaw tight, nodded, secretly acknowledging the brilliance of her preparation. Even Harding felt the grip of awe, mixed with the sting of worry. 8 shots had failed before. This was the 9th. One chance. One opportunity. One moment that could define life or death. The girl exhaled, letting the weight of the desert, the sniper, and the countless lives around her settle. Everything was ready. The rifle was steady, scope aligned, calculations complete. She had accounted for every factor, every variable, every unpredictable element. Now, all that remained was the execution, the moment where preparation met opportunity, where skill overcame impossibility. The desert held its breath. The soldiers held theirs. Lieutenant Colonel Harding felt the tension pressing down like a storm, knowing that the outcome of this mission, the lives of his men, and perhaps the legend of this girl depended entirely on what would happen next. And in that quiet, tense moment, she was ready. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Shadows stretched across the sand like long, dark fingers as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the landscape in molten gold and crimson. Every soldier on the ridge froze, eyes locked on the quiet girl who lay prone, rifle braced, scope aligned, and finger hovering over the trigger. 2.5 miles of heat haze, sand, and distance lay between her and the enemy sniper. And yet, in that moment, nothing else existed. No wind, no pain, no fear. Only the impossible opportunity waiting to be seized. Her breathing slowed, deep and steady, each exhale a measured rhythm that seemed to resonate with the pulse of the desert itself. She could feel the rifle beneath her, a precise extension of her body. Every calculation was complete. Distance, wind, humidity, mirage, even the slight curvature of the earth over such extreme range. She whispered numbers under her breath, subtle adjustments to compensate for the tiniest factors. Years of practice, patience, and discipline converged on this single instant. Around her, the soldiers were silent, the usual murmurs of the ridge extinguished by awe and tension. Even the veteran Sergeant Miller, skeptical until now, remained motionless, his arms tense and hands clenched around his rifle. Collins crouched nearby, his wide eyes locked on her as he muttered under his breath, She's going to do it?" Lieutenant Colonel Harding, crouched slightly behind her, felt the weight of every life in the formation pressing on him, every heartbeat synchronized with hers. 8 attempts had failed before. This was the 9th. One shot, one chance. The enemy sniper shifted slightly in the distant ridge, unaware that his unseen adversary was prepared, calculated, and deadly precise. He had dominated the battlefield for hours, confident in his skill and concealment. Yet he did not know that patience, training, and focus had combined in the form of the quiet girl lying in the sand. She exhaled, slowly, deliberately, and aligned her eye with the scope. Every heartbeat was a metronome, marking the rhythm of timing, precision, and readiness. Her gloved finger hovered lightly on the trigger, trembling imperceptibly only in the way necessary to adjust for recoil. The bipod of her .50 caliber rifle held steady against the sand, and she tested the minimal sway caused by her breath. One more exhale, one final adjustment for wind drift and mirage. Her mind, honed over years of quiet preparation, focused only on one point, the target miles away. Her body was still, but her awareness stretched across the desert, observing every subtle movement, every flicker of light on the enemy's position. Lieutenant Colonel Harding's pulse thundered in his ears. He had witnessed incredible feats in battle, yet this, he realized, was beyond anything he had imagined. 8 failures had come from experience, skill, and determination, but this was different. This was mastery, honed by preparation and patience beyond the comprehension of those who relied on speed, reaction, and brute force. The quiet girl had become a ghost herself, blending into the desert, waiting, calculating, ready to defy impossible odds. The sun sank further, casting long shadows that danced across the sand, blurring the line between terrain and mirage. She adjusted the scope slightly, aligning her crosshairs with the faint glint of metal across the ridge. The enemy sniper moved again, confident in his distance, unaware that someone had calculated every factor, measured every angle, and accounted for every subtle shift in wind and heat. One miscalculation on his part or one perfect shot on hers would determine the outcome. She exhaled once more, steadying herself. The men around her could feel the intensity, could sense the impossible moment approaching. Collins whispered again, barely audible, "Come on. Please, do it." Sergeant Miller clenched his teeth, refusing to let himself hope, yet secretly willing it. The commander's gaze remained fixed on her, a mixture of awe, fear, and anticipation. All doubt had vanished, replaced by the undeniable certainty that this soldier, quiet, overlooked, and underestimated, was about to challenge history. Her fingers squeezed the trigger slowly, gradually, with absolute precision. The shot erupted with a deafening roar, the .50 caliber rifle's recoil pushing her slightly against the sand. Dust and heat waves rose around her, but she remained calm, focused, unshaken. Time seemed to stretch as the bullet traveled the incredible distance across the desert, over ridges, heat haze, and wind currents. Every eye on the ridge followed the impossible trajectory, hearts pounding, breaths held. The desert itself seemed suspended, waiting to see if skill would triumph over distance and circumstance. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The sniper, still perched, unaware of the fate approaching, shifted slightly. The bullet traversed miles, invisible yet unstoppable, cutting through the space between predator and prey. The soldiers around her were frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, as anticipation reached its peak. Lieutenant Colonel Harding's mind raced, calculating the probability, praying silently, trusting the skill he had witnessed. And then, impossibly, it happened. The enemy sniper slumped sideways. The shot hit dead center, a perfect strike at an unimaginable distance of 4,200 meters. A wave of disbelief, awe, and stunned silence swept over the ridge. The impossible had been achieved. The quiet girl had done what 8 trained marksmen could not. Soldiers exchanged wide-eyed glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others staring in pure amazement. Even Sergeant Miller, ever the skeptic, lowered his rifle, mouth agape. The impossible had been made real in one perfect, calculated moment. Lieutenant Colonel Harding stared, dumbfounded. He had led countless operations, seen bravery and skill in countless forms, yet this was legendary. He felt a mixture of relief, admiration, and awe. The girl lowered her rifle slowly, methodically, calm, as if the shot were nothing more than another routine action. But everyone around her understood it had been far more. Lives had been saved. Fear had been replaced with awe. The impossible had been achieved. Collins whispered under his breath, barely audible. She did it? Miller shook his head slowly, finally acknowledging the brilliance before him. The soldier's disbelief gave way to respect, an understanding that the quietest person often carried the loudest impact. The sniper, once untouchable, had been felled by patience, skill, and preparation. The desert seemed to exhale, the tension breaking in a wave of awe and wonder. Time resumed, but nothing would ever feel the same on this ridge. The girl, still calm, lowered her weapon completely. She made no noise, no gestures of triumph. She was not seeking recognition or glory. She had executed a perfect shot, relied on years of preparation, and completed the impossible. The soldiers around her began to whisper, slowly, reverently, understanding that they had witnessed a historic moment. Harding stepped forward, speechless, then nodded once, deeply, a silent acknowledgement of respect for the quiet legend he had just watched in action. For the first time since the sniper had dominated the battlefield, the outpost felt safe. The impossible distance had been conquered. The quiet girl, underestimated and overlooked, had changed the course of the mission with one perfect shot. The desert stretched endlessly, indifferent, yet in that moment, it had witnessed something extraordinary, a human mind and skill capable of defying odds and redefining possibility. The desert air remained thick with tension, though now it carried a different weight, a mixture of disbelief, relief, and awe. The impossible had been achieved. The enemy sniper, a phantom of the battlefield who had terrorized the unit for hours, lay neutralized, struck dead at an unimaginable 4,200 meters. Soldiers who had been pinned behind sandbags, hearts racing, breath held, now slowly exhaled in unison. The quiet girl, calm and composed as ever, lowered her rifle with meticulous precision, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Yet everyone around her knew history had been made. Collins dropped to his knees, whispering in awe, I can't believe it. She did it? Sergeant Miller, usually cynical and hard to impress, slowly unclenched his fists, his jaw slack, eyes wide with reluctant admiration. For once, even he was speechless. The entire squad seemed suspended in a moment of shared disbelief, unable to process the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. 8 marksmen had failed. 8 lives had risked disaster. And now, one quiet soldier had achieved what none before could. Lieutenant Colonel Harding remained crouched nearby, his heart still hammering in his chest. The weight of responsibility, of fear, of hope, all collided in the aftermath of the shot. He had led countless missions, faced deadly snipers, and navigated impossible odds, yet this moment humbled him. He had doubted, questioned, and feared the outcome. And now, he understood the lesson the desert had just taught him. Patience, preparation, and mastery could triumph over brute force and even the impossible. The soldiers began to murmur, their voices low at first, then growing with excitement and disbelief. "Did you see that?" whispered Collins, his eyes wide as he glanced around at his comrades. "She hit him. At 4,200 meters. Another soldier, Private Lopez, shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "No way, no one can do that. She's—" His words faltered. Words seemed inadequate to describe what had just happened. The girl, silent and unassuming, had rewritten their understanding of possibility. Even the commander felt a rush of emotion he rarely allowed himself. He had led troops into impossible situations before, witnessed courage in countless forms, but he had never seen mastery combined with such composure. The girl's calm had been unshakable. Every calculation, every adjustment, every precise breath had culminated in a moment of perfection. He realized, as he observed the ridge, that her actions would resonate far beyond this mission. This was not just a successful shot, it was a lesson in patience, precision, and courage. The wind shifted again, stirring grains of sand and the faint echoes of earlier gunfire. The battlefield felt transformed. Where fear and tension had once dominated, awe and admiration now held sway. Soldiers began moving cautiously from their cover, their eyes still locked on the girl who had defied expectation and risked nothing less than perfection. Collins approached her slowly, kneeling beside the rifle she had just used. I've never seen anything like that," he whispered, voice trembling. You saved all of us." The girl did not respond verbally. A subtle nod, precise and controlled, acknowledged his words. Her focus remained absolute, even in the aftermath. To the others, her silence was both frustrating and inspiring. It spoke volumes without a single utterance. She had not acted for recognition, nor had she sought glory. She had relied on skill, patience, and preparation to accomplish what others thought impossible. And in that silent acknowledgement, she taught the soldiers more than words ever could. Harding finally stepped forward, walking carefully to the edge of the ridge. The adrenaline still coursing through his veins, he looked at the distant ridge where the enemy sniper had been perched. The impossible distance, the heat haze, the wind, all had been accounted for and overcome by one soldier's mastery. "You understand," Harding said, voice low but filled with awe. "That what you just did? No one else in the unit could have done that. Not today. Not ever." She nodded once, eyes still steady on the horizon, as if the shot had been routine rather than legendary. Word began to spread quickly among the base. Soldiers who had been pinned behind sandbags, watching helplessly as hours of firepower failed, now shared whispered exclamations of admiration and disbelief. By the time the story reached command channels, reports of the 4,200-meter shot were being repeated almost reverently. Radio chatter buzzed with disbelief, excitement, and awe. Somewhere far beyond the ridge, higher-ranking officers were beginning to recognize that this soldier, quiet, unassuming, and previously overlooked, had accomplished a feat bordering on myth. Collins and a few others approached cautiously, eyes wide as they studied her movements. She had already begun the meticulous process of checking the rifle, adjusting the scope, and securing her equipment. Every motion was deliberate, precise, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Yet the soldiers around her could feel the ripples of her achievement, the weight of the moment. She had become an example, not boastful, but undeniably powerful. She had redefined the boundaries of possibility in their minds. Miller finally approached, lowering his rifle slowly, respect in his eyes. "I thought you couldn't do it," he said quietly. "I thought it was impossible." But you proved me wrong." The girl simply nodded. No fanfare, no triumph, no theatrics. Her focus, her discipline, her silence remained intact. And in that, she commanded a type of respect few could ever achieve. She had not just made a perfect shot, she had reminded everyone present that mastery often resides in the quietest, least noticed individuals. Lieutenant Colonel Harding took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and reverence. The mission was secure, the sniper neutralized, and lives had been saved. He looked over his soldiers, sensing the awe that had settled over them. Collins was still whispering about the shot. Miller's eyes reflected reluctant admiration, and the others were shaken, inspired, and exhausted all at once. And through it all, the quiet girl remained serene, almost invisible in her composure, yet the epicenter of their collective astonishment. The commander realized that her impact extended beyond the ridge, beyond the mission, and beyond the desert itself. What she had accomplished would become legend, not merely a successful shot, but a lesson in preparation, patience, and courage. She had demonstrated that skill, combined with unwavering focus and discipline, could achieve what had previously seemed impossible. And perhaps more importantly, she had shown that the quietest among them could carry the heaviest burdens and emerge victorious. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows and a final golden glow across the desert, Harding gathered his soldiers. "Today," he said, voice steady, "you all witnessed something remarkable. Not just a shot, not just skill, but the power of preparation, patience, and courage. Remember this moment. Remember what she did." The soldiers nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the words. They had seen history unfold in real time, and they knew that the lessons of the ridge would remain with them forever. Collins approached the girl one last time, whispering, "Thank you for everything." She gave the faintest nod, a silent acknowledgement that needed no words. Sergeant Miller finally exhaled, the tension leaving his body, replaced with an uneasy but profound respect. And Harding, staring at the horizon, felt a mixture of awe, pride, and humility. The mission had succeeded. The impossible had been accomplished. And the legend of the quiet girl, who had struck true at 4,200 meters, was only beginning. The desert wind whispered across the ridge, carrying with it the silent testament to what had just occurred. 8 failures, 1 perfect shot, and a quiet soldier whose discipline, patience, and focus had altered the course of history. The soldiers gathered their equipment, still shaken but inspired, carrying with them the memory of a moment that would be told and retold for years to come. And somewhere, in the fading light, the quiet girl prepared to move forward, already thinking of the next mission, the next challenge, the next impossible task she would calmly, silently master. The desert had returned to its quiet rhythm, the heat settling into the sand and the wind whispering softly across the ridge. The battle had ended, but its echoes lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. The soldiers who had been pinned behind sandbags now moved cautiously across the ridge, still processing the impossible events that had unfolded before their eyes. And at the center of it all, silent and composed, was the girl who had made history not with words, not with fanfare, but with a single, perfect shot that defied imagination. Lieutenant Colonel Harding walked along the ridge, observing his soldiers' expressions of awe, disbelief, and newfound respect. He had led countless missions, faced innumerable threats, and witnessed acts of courage and skill in countless forms. Yet none compared to what he had just seen. 8 trained marksmen had failed. Lives had hung in the balance. And then the quiet girl, previously overlooked and underestimated, had executed the impossible with unwavering precision. He felt a mixture of relief, pride, and humility emotions rarely so intertwined. Word of the feat spread quickly through the ranks, carried by whispers, radio chatter, and the awe-filled voices of soldiers who had been present. Soon, higher command took notice, and what had started as a single mission to neutralize a sniper became a story of remarkable skill, patience, and focus. Officers who had never met the quiet soldier were now eager to understand the human behind the rifle, the life, training, and discipline that allowed her to accomplish what others could not. She was becoming a legend, though she remained blissfully unaware of the storm of admiration forming around her. The soldiers who had witnessed the shot carried a mix of emotions. Collins could barely contain his amazement, often replaying the moment in his mind, whispering to others about how calm and precise she had been. Sergeant Miller, skeptical and hardened by years of combat, found himself telling anyone who would listen that he had witnessed perfection in motion. Even Lieutenant Colonel Harding, usually measured and cautious in praise, could not contain his respect. He understood the significance of the act, not only as a mission success, but as a testament to what mastery, patience, and composure could achieve. In the following days, the story of the 4,200-meter shot became a central topic of conversation at the outpost. The soldiers began to view her not just as a member of the team, but as a symbol of the extraordinary potential that can reside in the quietest and most overlooked individuals. She did not boast or seek recognition, yet her actions inspired confidence, courage, and a renewed sense of possibility in every soldier who had witnessed the feat. Even in her silence, her presence commanded respect. Lieutenant Colonel Harding took time to meet with her privately, wanting to understand the mindset behind such a perfect execution. He was careful to maintain professionalism, but the awe in his eyes was unmistakable. "You changed the course of the mission," he said quietly. "Pete Marksman failed. You succeeded where no one else could. How did you remain so calm?" The girl looked at him, expression serene, almost as if the question were unnecessary. "I've trained for moments like this," she replied simply. "I focus. I calculate. I wait. The shot only comes when all variables align." Harding nodded slowly, realizing that her words, though simple, carried profound truth. In the heat of combat, when lives hung in the balance, her mastery of patience, preparation, and discipline had allowed her to achieve what had seemed impossible. Her calm was not indifference. It was a deliberate, disciplined control born of years of preparation. He understood that her actions would not only save lives, but would also leave an enduring lesson for every soldier who had witnessed her in action. The ripple effect extended beyond the ridge. Within the unit, morale soared. Soldiers who had previously doubted their own abilities began to see the value of patience, discipline, and meticulous preparation. The quiet girl's performance became a standard against which others measured themselves, not to compete, but to learn. Her example encouraged soldiers to cultivate focus, to observe carefully, and to understand that skill and preparation often mattered more than bravado or speed. The story reached higher command, spreading quickly through military channels. Reports described a perfect shot at 4,200 meters, executed by a previously overlooked soldier who had remained silent and composed throughout. Analysts, trainers, and commanders marveled at the achievement, studying it as a case of extraordinary marksmanship and psychological composure. Manuals and training protocols began to reference the event, not merely for technique, but as a lesson in patience, discipline, and the power of silent focus under pressure. Even in broader military circles, the legend began to grow. Articles and internal communications circulated detailing the shot, the preparation, and the calm execution under extreme stress. Her story became a symbol not just of marksmanship, but of the potential within every soldier to achieve greatness through discipline, preparation, and courage. The quiet girl had become more than a soldier. She had become an icon, a living lesson in the value of meticulous preparation and unwavering focus. Back at the outpost, life slowly returned to routine. The ridge, once dominated by fear, had become a place of reverence. Soldiers remembered the sound of the shot, the tension, and the calm presence of the girl who had changed the course of the mission. Lieutenant Colonel Harding often found himself reflecting on the lesson she had imparted, not through words, but through action. True skill, courage, and mastery often resided where it was least expected, and extraordinary results often came from patience, observation, and preparation. Over time, the quiet girl continued to serve, her reputation growing quietly alongside her accomplishments. She remained humble, focused, and unassuming, never seeking attention, yet consistently demonstrating skill and composure that inspired everyone around her. Soldiers looked to her not only as a colleague, but as a symbol of what could be achieved when patience and preparation converged at the perfect moment. Her legend became a quiet but powerful presence in the unit, a reminder of the extraordinary potential hidden in silence. Lieutenant Colonel Harding, reflecting on the events from the ridge to the debrief, understood that the true legacy was more than a single shot. It was a lesson in human potential, discipline, and courage. The quiet girl had shown that mastery of oneself could achieve the impossible, that the underestimated could emerge as the decisive force, and that patience, preparation, and focus were often more powerful than speed or brute force. He knew the story would be told for years to come, not just as a tale of marksmanship, but as a symbol of the extraordinary potential in every soldier who learns to focus, observe, and act with precision. And so, the ridge remained in memory as a place where history was quietly rewritten. Soldiers, new and old, spoke of the day when a quiet, unassuming soldier changed the course of a mission with a single perfect shot. The desert, indifferent to human achievement, continued to stretch endlessly, but in the minds and hearts of those who witnessed it, the legend endured. She had done the impossible, not for recognition, not for glory, but because it was her training, her patience, and her focus that demanded excellence. In the end, the legacy was clear. The quiet girl had proven that heroes do not always announce themselves with loud gestures or bold words. Sometimes they emerge silently, patiently, and with meticulous preparation. And sometimes they execute a single action so perfect that it changes everything, leaving a ripple that will inspire generations. The soldiers who witnessed it, the commanders who recognized it, and the future generations who would hear the story all understood one immutable truth: greatness often comes in silence, and the quietest among us can achieve the loudest, most unforgettable victories.